Hey guys, this is Stefan for BitB Spins, and today I'm here with the third part of our free video series. In the first parts we spoke about nitros in general and also preflop, and especially the preflop part I actually recommend you to watch once more. Make sure that you get access to all of the charts through the DoJo, and then only after that and only after you're somewhat comfortable with playing preflop, you should actually start watching this postflop video, because as long as you're not really sure what you're doing preflop, whatever you're doing postflop will not matter. Like preflop is a very, very important thing of playing nitros. So this first part of the postflop series will be about mate hands. The second part will be about no mate hands. So if you want to see this one, you would also need to join the dojo. Again, that's pretty much free. Just sign up with our affiliation link on the website and you can get access to the dojo and all the free videos that are in there. If you already have an account, you can also get access. Just look at on the website. There's an option to link your account. All right, so let's start. I want to start this one with a quote from Albert Einstein, and pretty much just making you aware that whatever you have right now, like the content that you're getting here for free, which is honestly really, really great content, especially for nitros, this is not enough. Like, you can watch that, you can start playing, and that's all good. But as long as you're not moving forward, as long as you're not getting more content and good digested content, you will never make it to the top, and you're probably not getting extremely happy playing poker, or at least not being very successful. So the best that you can do is watch this, take it all in, make your first steps, and then go further. I highly recommend, obviously, first of all, the dojo, but even after the dojo, there are way more steps. Especially getting a good coach or good team that actually accommodates you is very, very important in today's games, and that will help you to actually always get better and at some point become actually wise in terms of poker and in terms of your poker skills. So with that said, let's jump into it. As I said, we will speak about value hands today. So value hands are pretty much all the hands that are pairs or stronger. We're speaking about it as an aggressor and versus aggression. Starting versus aggression. So if we are the preflop defender, we have a top pair or better. Usually we're gonna raise. It depends a bit on the size of our opponent's bets, but usually that's a very, very good goal here. And if we have weak pairs, we are calling. Obviously, keep in mind this whole video series, this is for free. It is a very short one about post-flop play. So there will be general guidelines, and with these guidelines, we believe that you can surely beat the lowest stakes on nitros. But if you want to go further, the dojo actually has a bunch of live plays in which you can understand what we're doing. Or the next step, which I think is certainly the best, is joining our team. We have a lot of videos just dedicated to only flop play, to turn play, to river play, all the positions differently, because there are always nuances that are important that you cannot just look at in a 10-minute video pretty much. But yeah, so keep this in mind as a general guideline and what you're supposed to do. So if we're on the flop and we have the preflop aggressor, we want to bet if we have the opportunity. We're betting rather small, so around 33% in a raise spot. That's 30 chips into 80, for example. If we don't have the option to bet, what we actually want to do is just the same as we would be doing as a preflop defender. So our strongest hands we raise, all the other hands we call. Make no mistake and don't fold. Like, folding in with the weak pairs is usually a fairly big mistake. So that's the one important thing that you should avoid here. If we are betting and we get raised, usually we want to call with all of these hands. Obviously, that depends on the size of our opponent's bets. So if they're betting too big, that's a good thing for us, or like a good indication for us to fold, or like if they're raising too big, but usually we want to call. Going further to the flop, again, we have to evaluate first of all how strong our hand is, what kind of board structure there is, and yeah, generally speaking, like what happened before as well. Nonetheless, we can make it somewhat simple, and as long as we still have a top pair or something better, these are the hands that we want to raise or bet big. Of course, that's not always the case. So let's say there are 4 cards to a straight on the board, then top pair isn't top pair anymore, but rather a weaker straight. But as a general idea, this holds true. So the better our hand is, the more likely we are that we want to get the money in, and we're planning to do that latest by the river. So betting big on the turn makes a lot of sense. If we have weaker pairs, like a middle pair or a weak pair, usually at some point we can start folding those, but that's only for the weaker pairs. But most of the time we don't want to play fairly aggressive with these hands. Rather a bit more passive. If our opponent is betting, we can call, especially with middle pair hands. If our opponent is betting slightly bigger with weak hands, we are happy folding, and that's all good. When we're out of position and there was a check on the flop, this is when our hand strength actually becomes a bit, stronger in general. So if there is no action on the flop, it means that the range of our opponent is weaker than in other scenarios, if he would be betting, for example. So if that's the case, even middle pairs can be good hands to already bet on the turn, to just get some value from our opponent and don't let him get the river cheaply. And last but not least, the river, and actually one of the more important streets. As I said, we can only give you a very quick guideline here. We can't go too much in depth. And if you want that, you have all the opportunities with us to get all that content. For now, let's focus on some easy guidelines on the river. Usually we are fairly happy to get the money in with all our good hands. And actually there's one thing that I frequently hear from players, that sometimes they have a good hand and their opponent has a better one, and they wonder, was it really good to get it in here? And I just got trashed because my opponent had a better hand. Like, what is that? We shouldn't do that. And in fact, yes, of course, it will happen that our opponents have stronger hands sometimes, and we have to be aware of that. But most of the time, nonetheless, whenever we have a good hand, our strategy is quite easy and we just want to get the money in. Because yes, people will have a better hand sometimes, but more frequently than not, they actually have a weaker one. If we have weaker hands in general, we need to evaluate the pot size a bit more and decide whether we want to put more money in. Usually with weaker pairs, that's not the case if there was some action. And that's the next thing we need to look at. Like the three different scenarios that I have here on the bottom is whatever happened on the turn before, and also flop play is important. So the more action there was, so the more betting, the more raising on the street before, the less likely are we to put money in with our weaker hands. And the bigger hands we need to actually put some money in. So for example, if it goes check on the turn, that usually means that the range of our opponent isn't that strong. So even second pair type hands can get strong enough to either call if our opponent is betting, or potentially bluff catch, and so on. Or potentially even like value bet on our own. But we have to be aware of that, especially if it goes check on the flop and also check on the turn. This is when, for example, second pair type of hands are certainly strong enough to get some value from our opponents. On the other hand, if we bet on the turn, that means that the range of our opponent is quite strong. We bet on the turn, so he only calls his stronger hands. So at this point, to then bet again, we need a fairly strong hand to bet once more and get some value of our opponent. And on the same time, let's say we bet on the turn and our opponent is then betting on the river after calling. That's also where we need a fairly strong hand to make sure that we're calling. And when we're talking about strong hands, it's not actually always like a top pair. Most of the time, if we're betting, we have the option to bet again. Top pair is good. Let's say we're betting, our opponent is calling, our opponent is betting the river, then potentially top pair actually isn't good enough. We might need a better two pair or something like that. And on the other hand, like if we called on the turn, that's when usually we need the strongest hands to put money in. Facing a bet on the river very frequently means that our opponent is strong, especially if we already bet the street before. Let's say in this first example where the board is check, our opponent is betting on the river. That's where we can hero call sometimes because the pot isn't as big and people try to take the pot away sometimes. But after they bet on the turn and maybe they even have to go all in on the river, this is where they very rarely bluff actually. So to then call a bet, our hand strength needs to be even bigger or even better. So you can kind of look at it this way, where depending on the action that happened on the turn, if it's check, our hands don't need to be that strong. If there was a bet on the turn, after we bet on the turn, our hand needs to be fairly strong. If we already called on the turn and our opponent bets again, then we really need to be careful with what we're doing. All right, that's it for the main part of this video. Again, I highly recommend you guys to join the dojo, because there you get access on the second part where I talk about no-mate hands. What I actually think is more important than how you play your value hands, because that's where, like, first of all, most of the time you have no-mate hands, so that's where you can actually get a lot of value from. And yes, I also hope that you actually took a lot of notes, because there's a lot of value in this video. I also recommend to watch it once more. Make sure that you really understand everything that's going on. Try to think about these situations a bit more in depth. And yeah, pretty much have success at the tables and enjoy your time. Thank you guys. Have a good one.